So, good afternoon, everybody. It is good to be with you here. We are having our second press briefing at the 13th Assembly of the LWF. My name is Arne Danielsson. I am the Head of Communication for the Lutheran World Federation. Thank you to all who are joining us here in person, and also to those of you who are joining us online, whichever time zone you may find yourself in. We have the LWF General Secretary, Reverend Dr. Anne Burkhardt, and Monsignor Professor Thomas Hallig, who is our keynote speaker. So I wanted to open by asking them a couple of questions, and then I think we will open for questions. We have 25 minutes approximately for today. So maybe if we begin with you, General Secretary, you were giving an overview of the LWF's journey from Windhoek to Krakow. And if you could quite briefly share what you see as some of the highlights of that journey that we've gone through. Take this one.
Okay. Thank you. Well, it can have a very long and a very short response, so thank you for this opening question, Arne. Well, I would say that just to start on a very general level, my impression is that despite the pandemic, the LWF as a communion has come out really strong in terms of increasing communion, increasing membership increasing relations between the membership, strengthening relations between the churches. And secondly, we could name various highlights from different areas of LWF's work. When we talk about communion relations, I'm very happy that we were able to again introduce in-person meetings for church leaders, newly elected church leaders, and also lay leaders, because this strengthens their mutual relationships, it strengthens their knowledge about the global communion. And I'm very happy that we were able to initiate a process which is called Mutual Accountability Framework, or working on developing a mutual accountability framework, because, of course, as a communion of autonomous churches, there is always the question, what is exactly the relation between the autonomy of member churches and their mutual accountability? Then what I would highlight from ecumenical relations, I'm just trying to move along the four pillars that the LWF is founded upon. In terms of ecumenical relations, we just recently finalized the first ever Lutheran Pentecostal report, dialogue report, which has been looking into various questions that have been perhaps matters of which have needed a little clarification in terms of relations between the two church families. And this is, in a sense, a beginning of a longer dialogue because it mainly served as an introduction to better learn to know each other. In terms of Lutheran Catholic relationships, we have actually been looking mainly into the question of understanding of baptism over the past few years, and this was also topic that emerged in the first ever trilateral dialogue the LWF has had with Roman Catholics and Mennonites. Then when we move on to theology and education, we have formed during the past 6 years theological education and formation network, which we hope to strengthen also in the next strategic period, because we clearly see that transformative theological education is an area where we need to get stronger and also strengthen our member churches, because this is something that really enables to encounter polarizing tendencies and simplified or simplistic responses to to complex questions in today's world. Then perhaps also very briefly to mention our humanitarian response and advocacy work, because what has been... Yes, yeah, thanks. We have a new unit in the Communion Office of the LWF called Action for Justice, which works on strengthening the response of our member churches also in terms of different advocacy matters and so on. So I could go on endlessly, but I believe I perhaps stop here. So those of you who have been able to make yourselves familiar with my report, I'm very glad to go into more details later.
Thank you so much. I would maybe like to take one or two questions that are specifically related to the report of the General Secretary before I would give you the floor, Professor Halleck, so that we can cover. Thank you. Benjamin, if we begin with you. Sorry, Benjamin, I have to hand you a microphone, so you will get this one.
You mentioned in your report travel you did to Uganda. I was wondering a little, you did not mention anything about the situation in Uganda regarding same-sex couples and homosexuality. So what is the position of the LWF on this topic, and what is the position of its Ugandan member churches about it?
Well, let me start with the second point. We don't have a member church in Uganda. But we do have a World Service Country Program, which is one of our largest country programs, and very clearly the issue that you mentioned in view of the position of Ugandan government on homosexuality is more than problematic. So, in a sense, our country program is working and acting in a very difficult legal context, let's put it this way. But as I brought an example in my presentation from Sierra Leone, for instance, where our member church actually did advocacy in the framework of UPR process for abolishing death penalty from the local legislation. Similarly, in Uganda, we are trying to find ways how to protect human dignity of each and every human being, while still supporting 700,000 people in the country.
Thank you so much. Melis, you had raised your hand. Astrid.
Melis Suld from the Council of Lutheran Church as outreach coordinator. Well, it's related to the previous question a bit. You mentioned in the report that the policy of the LWF has been on the issue of human sexuality not to take actions in this thing. Just to clarify, has any member church left the Lutheran Communion on basis of this question, even if the strategy has been quite moderate and not to take action?
Well, the response is very short, not at this point in time.
Thank you very much. Now, I'd like to move over to Professor Halleck so that we can have a short discussion on your presentation, and then actually, because we have the two of you here, you spoke in your keynote speech, and thank you very much for that, and for the inspiration you have given us on the theme of one body, one spirit, one hope. You spoke about reformations and reformations through history and the need for a reformation today. Could you unpack that a little bit and maybe connect it to what you would see as key elements for us as Lutherans, where we can come in, or you would see a role for the voice of the Lutherans? What would be your call to the Lutherans in this respect?
I think there were many reformations during the history of the church. The first one was the attempt of the St. Paul to introduce, to lead the young Christianity from the context of one of the Jewish sects to be an offer, universal offer in the oikumene of this antique world. And then were this also some reformations in the Middle Age, and especially the two reformations in the 16th century. The Protestant one, connected with Luther and others, and the Catholic one, connected with some mystics like Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, Ignatius from Loyola. And I think there is something similar between them. Yes, there are great differences, but similar was to discover the personal relationship with Christ as the most important thing. And I think also this Ignatius of Loyola, for example, it was a pedagogic how to follow Christ through this accommodation to his life and to share the cross and so on. And but these two reformations in the 16th century never met and never enriched each other, and it led also to the division of the church. And I think in the 20th century also two reformation, the Catholic Church, the Vatican II, which was the transition from this closed Catholicism of the 19th century, the counterculture against Protestant modernity, to the Catholicity, the ecumenical Catholicity. And but also this Pentecostal renewal and evangelical renewal in the Protestant churches and in the Lutheran churches was also some sort of reformation. And I think we should continue in this and to meet in what is now the Pope Francis is speaking about the synodality. And I think the synodal reform is something very important to change the church from this clerical, bureaucratical institution to the common way. Synodos is the common way. But if common way, so it must be also with other Christians, so to deepen the ecumenical relations. But I think the unity among the Christian churches is not the final step. It is the byproduct of our attempt for a greater unity, for the unity with all people and with all creation. And the Pope Francis spoke about it in his encyclical Fratelli Tutti. And I think there are many impulses. And I took this opportunity to introduce some of the ideas of the Pope Francis in this ecumenical context. And I was very surprised with this invitation, and I appreciate it very much. And I think it's a great opportunity, and we should go together, Father.
Thank you so much. I think if someone has questions for Professor Halleck, yes, Jan?
Yes, Professor, you were mentioning several reformations throughout history, and basically all of them used to have leaders or standard bearers. So who should lead the new revolution or the new reformation, as you said, in the 21st century?
It's a difficult question. I can't say any names. I think on the Catholic side, the Pope Francis is the man of some reform ideas. I don't know if there is some one personality in the Lutheran world, but I think there are many open theologians also. But I can't say there is one new Luther, maybe, but I don't know him yet.
Thank you so much, Benjamin.
A more personal question, but probably of interest. I mean, have you ever thought in your personal life of becoming a Lutheran? And why not? Or why? Or how is your personal position regarding to Lutheranism? What unites you with Lutheranism and what divides you?
I heard today after my lecture that I'm a Lutheran theologian, so I don't know if all our bishops will be very happy about about this. But I think that I was born in the secular intellectual family in Prague without any religious education, and in my childhood I was a great supporter of Hus and Hussites, and it is still part of my identity. This pre-Reformation, especially Jan Hus, the personality of Jan Hus, and I spoke with John Paul II many times about it, and I took part in this preparation of this conference about Jan Hus in Prague, in Rome. So this rehabilitation of Jan Hus, it's my heart thing. I think the Luther was really a great theologian, and I think I like some authors like Pesch, and they have the Catholic interpretation of Luther, of the Luther for Catholic. Also, Cardinal Kasper wrote a book about the Luther for Catholic, and I think if we put the Luther in the broader context, especially the context of the German mystics, we can understand him deeper. I think without Martha Eckhart, there will be no Luther. And I think in this context, we can understand Luther even more without this context. So I think it's important to put this and for me, the ecumenism is the acknowledgement of the charisma of the other streams in the Christianity. It is the goal of ecumenism is not the uniformity, but the acknowledgement. And for me, the Catholic Church, when I decided I was baptized as a child in Catholic Church, but I grew up without any religious education. And when I was 18 and I was thinking about the churches and so on, so for me the Catholic Church was attractive because of the plurality. I think there's so many, the Franciscans, the Jesuits, then the Trappists, and those so many spiritualities. And they create one family. And I think I spoke once with one Protestant, with one evangelical bishop in our country, and he told me, the Unitas Fratrum, it would be a very nice community like the Franciscans and so on. If in Catholic Church there was a new Reformation, you created a new religious order. We created a new church, and I think it's better to put all these impulses in the one family with the acknowledgement, not with uniformity, but the acknowledgement and the compatibility. We can enrich the others with our otherness. So perhaps. I cannot be Catholic. I think I cannot be really Catholic without Luther. Because it's part of my, if I think Catholicity, not just the Catholicism, I think the Catholicism was a very problematic form of the Catholic Church, like the counterculture against Protestantism. The real Catholicity must integrate, but with acknowledgement, not just to put in the same, but acknowledgement, and this. So I can't be really Catholic, universal, without this great tradition of Christianity.
Thank you so much. We have another question here, but I actually want to ask you, General Secretary Burkhardt, having listened to this, you had a distinction you made in your report about confessional and confessionalistic, which seems to echo a little bit with this. So could you reflect on that with us?
As you know, the LWF claims to be and is a confessional Christian communion, meaning that it is based on confessional writings. And in my view, these confessional writings, particularly the Augsburg Confession, offer us the lenses through which we see Christian tradition. And in my view, ecumenism is very difficult if one does not have any profile. So in that sense, if we say that we are confessional, that does not mean that we are confessionalist in the sense of looking only at ourselves, or as Luther said in Latin, incurvatus in se, being turned in upon ourselves. But we know where we stand upon and are there free to serve God and our neighbor based on this basis.
Thank you so much. Stefan, you had a question.
Thank you. A question to both. There is a big wish and desire to unity and to oikumene. Are there any limits? Are there any borders you won't get over? What are the limits for oikumene, especially regarding other religions?
Well, thank you. I can start. Well, first of all, I think I would make a clear distinction between terms, between ecumenism and interfaith relations in this context. When it comes to limits of ecumenism, I think these days we realize particularly clearly that often these limits have to do with questions of power and authority, how it is understood in certain contexts or perhaps also in different traditions. Because often what have been regarded as issues of dispute or church dividing matters, often one has come to the conclusion as a result of ecumenical dialogue that these issues in themselves are not necessarily church dividing. For instance, even if we take the much debated question of Holy Communion and understanding of Holy Communion, then the global Lutheran Roman Catholic dialogue has long ago already stated that in terms of understanding what Eucharist is, what Holy Communion is, there are no major differences really, but then particularly for the Roman Catholic Church, it is of course to be seen in a broader context of ecclesiology, understanding of church and ministry, and there we enter again into different set of questions. So I don't know if you would like to add something to that. When it comes to interfaith relations, I think in a sense this is a bit more diverse and more complicated because on the one hand, of course, God is the creator of the whole universe according to Christian understanding. Yet this can, if we then somehow claim this understanding also on other religions that that may sometimes also lead to a bit complicated conclusions. So it is one thing to talk about also interfaith relations between Abrahamic religions, and then it is looks slightly different if we go beyond that. So I believe there we also mainly need to concentrate on public theology, how we best serve as religious people in the world.
I believe in the resurrectio continua, and the resurrection is the main is the key of the Christian identity, but it is not the event of the past. It is something which is continuing. The Augustine said, to pray, it means to close your eye and realize that God is creating the world just now. And I think the belief in Christ and the resurrection of Christ is open our heart and realize that Christ is now going from the grave in our churches, in our lives, and so, and open our heart, our mind to this continuing process of resurrection, which has the cosmic. I've got this Theardian inspiration by the Théâtre de Chardin and the cosmic Christ, and I think we should discover the universal Christ, the Christ behind all our concept, that all our theological concepts are too narrow, and we must overcome it. They are just metaphor. We just see like in the mirror, like in the riddle, and we are on the way. And I think it's very important to be the communio viatorum, the community of pilgrims in our theology, in our life, and that we are only just on the way. It means we cannot stop and say, yes, it is the goal, and to be so triumphalistic. But we cannot be lazy also. We must take part on this God's dynamism. God is happening now. And this dynamism, to discover this dynamism and to take part in this process, I think is very important.
Thank you so much. We're going to take two short questions, and then I have a final question for the two of you. We have a question from our online audience. Vesa Häkkinen asks General Secretary Burkhardt, there was a question concerning indigenous people at the plenary after your report. And his question is, do you see LWF as having a more guiding role towards member churches on this particular issue?
As I responded also at the plenary, I do hope that this voice will come to the broader attention of the communion through a possible resolution, and I would be very happy to see it also reflected more in our programmatic work, because as I mentioned, some of our member churches have been doing very good reconciliation work with indigenous communities, particularly in the Nordic countries and also in Canada. But then, of course, last but not least, we also need to mention that some of our member churches themselves consist predominantly of indigenous communities. For instance, in Bolivia, in Latin America, or also some of our member churches in India. So they themselves actually constitute indigenous communities within contexts which are not always, or which are sometimes quite hostile towards them. So actually we do have these voices already within the communion, but I think we have to work more on making them more audible.
Thank you so much. And then we have from, I don't see your name again, sorry. Dr. Link.
Thank you. Coming back to what you were saying to the inter-ecumenical dialogue, there are obstacles still there which have to be overcome. It is the condemnations between Luther and the Pope, which was never put away. Luther calling the Pope the Antichrist, and the Pope calling Luther and all his followers up today heretics. And unless we will overcome these official meanings, not private ones, but official confessional writings for the Lutheran side and an official text from Rome, we will never get to the point of having common communion. Please comment on that.
Thank you for this question. I would here like to refer to the last day of our assembly, where we will have an ecumenical panel. And during this panel, a common word will be presented by Cardinal Koch and myself. And it will not be perhaps preempting a little bit as revolutionary as one might hope, but I believe these two issues de facto are not really dividing our churches or communions anymore.
Thank you. So the short answer is stay tuned. Thank you so much. A final question to our two panelists here. You have spoken a lot about unity as a key, and that is the topic that sort of goes through the whole of the LWF Assembly theme. The final part of the theme is hope. And what I would like to ask each of you is, how can the churches be strong voices for hope in today's sometimes very complicated society where we see polarization, where we see fear, where we see conflict? How can the churches be voices for hope? And if I could begin with you, Professor Halleck.
I remember the scene from the Gospel when Jesus came first time to his future disciples. It was in the morning, and they were after the all night fishing, and they have the nets were empty, and they were very tired. And I think psychologically it is not very nice moment to speak with somebody in that moment. And the Christ came to those people, and they have the same feeling like many fisher of men today. We are tired, our nets are empty, and Jesus said, try again, go to the depth, try again. And I think it is the message of faith connected with hope. Try again, and it does not mean to repeat the old mistakes, but creatively, try again. And I think it is hope and faith. Try again and go to the depths. Not to the right, not to the left. Go to the depths. And I think that's a message of hope for today.
Thank you. First of all, I think it is important to distinguish between hope and optimism. And I absolutely agree with you that that sometimes one may come to a moment of desperation, particularly where one happens to be encountered with not the nicest sides of being human sometimes, and also with attempts seemingly running into empty results, so to say. But someone has very nicely said that we don't have the liberty to give up working for the better world and proclaiming the gospel. So, on the one hand, we need to make sure that we always stand on the foundations of the gospel message, which is itself a good news. And secondly, we need to put our faith in action. And here again, I would like to come back to explaining again why LWF is a unique communion of churches, that on the one hand, we are there to proclaim the gospel, but not only in words, but also in deeds.
Thank you so much, Professor Halleck and General Secretary Burkhardt, and thank you all for joining us here. We will continue with our media work, and as I've said before, we are so grateful you are here to be with us. Tomorrow we will have a press briefing with the keynote speaker on the topic of one body, and we hope to see all of you there. Have a wonderful... Cornelia, what time? 12:30 tomorrow, provided everything is on time, which it should be. Thank you so much and have a lovely afternoon.